you know, so we had a lot to cover up.
So guys,
what's going on?
Greg Kading is out. His lawyer won't let him do it, so
we've been waiting around for Kading all day, and
yeah, and now
he's not
he's
coming.
a no-show.
Really, I wanted to talk to him because there's so much to ask him.
Yeah.
Puffy was going up the stairs, and he said, I don't care if Tupac died, I don't care if Biggie gotta die, and I don't care if Suge gotta go to prison for the rest of his life.
We got a confession letter on how everything went down and who's responsible.
Now, getting back to Russell was following in the footsteps of his dad, and he was able to work through the LAPD and have all the things that had to be done within the LAPD. He certainly knew the streets very well, and circumstances in his case were far more tragic because he was killed in the line of duty.
If that's the case, did Tupac life mean anything? Because they never saw that case. Sometimes if you saw the first case, you might have saw the second case. But that never happened, correct?
Yep.
But he did testify reluctantly. The Death Row Records security chief Reggie Wright Jr. once told him, quote, "We're going to get those mothers who downed Pac."
Through interviews of former police officers that worked in the Death Row organization, Mack and Gaines were identified as confidants of Suge Knight, the owner of Death Row Records. They were present during private death row parties, and that's where first time that we were able to really make the connection between those two.
She don't want to get caught in a situation. That's why she was going to snatch the money from Knight and them, and there don't be no money, because she can't see the big picture, and she don't understand the big picture. She don't understand the master and how it can be levied and how we can go and do what we need to do with it. She don't understand that.
Ice and I, we've heard consistently, Suge, that you're the person behind the hit on Biggie.
Well, they looked at y'all and told y'all a fat-ass lie.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sarita and Reg is great friends, and so all those three together was trying to plot.
A reportedly missing photograph and former police chief Bernard Park's daughter came up during testimony today in the wrongful death lawsuit filed against the city by murdered rap star Biggie Smalls' mother.
That, to me, was probably another motive for Chief Parks to want to squash a lot of the information. There was an effort to keep a lot of the information away from the public.
This declaration from a jailhouse informant named Kenny Boagni links crooked LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of rap star Biggie Smalls.
Okay. Right? You see, Suge was willing to say, I didn't know those two cops, but maybe Reggie knew them.
Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie right. They didn't know me.
He always would say, those are Reggie people.
And Reggie was fast to say, I didn't know them either.
I was just interested in why he would point the finger at Suge so quick. He wouldn't say it to you, but he definitely pointed it. We call that dry snitching.
That Perez told how he worked security for Death Row Records the night Biggie Smalls was assassinated, and how he and Mack used cell phones to set up the hit. Boagni now says he was instructed by an LAPD detective to share his story with no one else investigating Biggie's murder. Judge Florence Marie Cooper says LAPD may be involved in what she calls deliberate and intentional concealment of information. Jailhouse informant Kenny Boagni ties former LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of rap star Biggie Smalls. LAPD has withheld reams of other evidence as well, including at least 2 other jailhouse statements implicating dirty cops Mack and Perez in Biggie's murder. 1,000 pages of information were withheld describing Mack and Perez's involvement in Biggie's murder. 3 different jailhouse informants who offered to wear a wire were all turned down by LAPD. A wire, say informants, that could have caught jailed officer Perez boasting about his involvement with Death Row Records and the Biggie Smalls murder. Judge Florence Marie Cooper lists all the new information she says links former crooked LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of Biggie Smalls. The sheer volume of the information, says the judge, belies any LAPD argument that it comes from just another jailhouse informant.
Murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sharita and Reg is great friends, and so all those three together was trying to plot. Those guys, if you go back and watch the film, they was already stalking Pac, watching him. So that just tipped the iceberg when something happened. But there was a plan already to do something to him. Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? He was actually a good kid too, you know? I'm quite sure if they saw the first one, they would saw the second one, because it's the same circle of people.
You got a lot to cover up, y'all.
Freudian slip.
You got a lot to cover up.
You know, because I asked Suge, did he kill Pac? I wanted to know. So tell me, you know, like, did you get him killed? Like, what's up? You know, we had a long talk about that, and that's why when a person asked me, I'm 100% say that man didn't have nothing to do with Tupac getting killed at all. Nothing. He didn't have nothing to do with Tupac getting killed.
So I wanted to talk a little bit today about Tupac and Snoop. And if Tupac and Snoop were so close, why didn't Snoop drop everything and go rushing to the hospital to come see his buddy in the hospital? Day 1, day 2, day 3 even. Why is Snoop one of the last people to visit Tupac when he's alive? Why? If they're so close, if they're such good friends, if they were such good buddies, and if Snoop really wanted to be the person to induct Tupac into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, why didn't he go visit him sooner? I mean, it's just a question that we need to ask. So we have the first press conference that says that Tupac's not even in critical condition. And then the doctor comes out and he says that Tupac is expected to recover. And think about the liability issues of saying that a celebrity is expected to recover and then that celebrity ends up dying. I mean, they don't come out and say somebody's expected to recover unless they're pretty certain that the celebrity is going to recover. And so that's another thing that tells us that Tupac was most likely finished off in the hospital. Now, a few doctors that I've spoken to talk about how easy it is to kill somebody while they're in the hospital. I mean, that IV drip is going directly into the bloodstream. Getting any kind of a toxin into that IV is fairly easy. Anybody that knows their way around a hospital room could easily do that. An overdose of oxytocin could easily cause a heart attack. And so it would have been fairly simple to kill Tupac in that hospital. And you think about the distraction that happened, Snoop shows up. We need 10 seconds to get in that hospital room and create, some kind of a problem with Tupac. And we look at the proficiency of this group with poisons. I mean, look at the Harry O thing that's in Lydia Harris's documentary, where Kenner shows up and gives him a 7-Up and he gets deathly ill from that. And look at the number of people that have had heart attacks and have died around this case. There are numerous people that have died of heart attacks. Russell Poole died of a heart attack. Afeni Shakur died of a heart attack. Nate Dogg died of a stroke. And Tupac dies of a heart attack. And he has 3 heart attacks. They revive him 3 times. And then finally Afeni says, pull the plug. Let him go. And they let him go. That's how Tupac dies. Snoop Dogg says he wanted to see his homie. He says he whispered into Tupac's ear and he felt like he got it. We heard "Got Him" come over the radio, and then we heard that Tupac was whispered to by Snoop, who said he got it. I wonder what that really means. Yo-Yo said that he knew who shot him. She was convinced that Tupac knew who shot him. And if that was the case, and he was going to come out of this coma and he was going to start pointing fingers and going after people, everybody that was involved wanted him dead. No question about it. And Nate Dogg was following behind Tupac. Nate Dogg was in the car. Nate Dogg is related to Little Half Dead. Little Half Dead's birthday happens to be the 13th. Can you imagine if Little Half Dead is the shooter? What a great birthday present this was for Little Half Dead to see Tupac Shakur die on his birthday. Why is it that the Compton PD always celebrates their reunion on the 13th of September? They have a reunion for the Compton police. They celebrate their reunion on the 13th of September. In Las Vegas, usually. Nate Dogg was following behind. He said to Daz that Tupac and Suge were dead. We hear coming over Reggie Wright's radio, Michael Moore sitting next to him, here's "Got 'em." Doesn't that sound familiar? It sounds like the same story. "Got 'em" means Tupac and Suge are dead. Means more than one. That means Tupac and Suge. They were both targets that night. Not one being a target, both of them being a target. "Got 'em" refers to Tupac and Suge were both dead. And that's exactly what Nate Dogg tells Daz. He tells Daz, Tupac and Suge are dead. Eyewitnesses to the crime say that the shooter was very deliberate in his aim. He knew he was going after. Yakfullah says it was jealousy, that he could tell that it was a jealousy motive for the shooter. Both Frank Alexander and Yakfullah talk about a dark black arm. Little Half Dead had a dark black arm, and Little Half Dead is dark black. And that fits with the eyewitness statements that we had that night. There were death threats that Tupac received while he was in the hospital. And those death threats sent the family members out to the outer perimeters guarding against an attack from outside, while the attack was actually going on the inside. Frank Alexander gets the phone call. He's called away. His phone is blown up by Reggie Wright Jr. There's 50 phone calls. Got to get over here. Big meeting over at Suge's. And that's when Snoop shows up after Frank Alexander skips out. Gobi mentions that hardly anybody was watching Tupac. Gobi also mentions that Reggie Wright Jr. was at the hospital. And was he at the hospital right when that all happened? No, he was at Suge's waiting for Frank Alexander, blowing up Frank Alexander's phone, clearing the way for something to happen to Tupac. Danny Boy sings "A Change Is Gonna Come," and there's tears that stream down Tupac's face at hearing this song. So Tupac, even though he was unconscious, kind of had some kind of a knowledge of what was actually happening in the room. And when Snoop was there, bed shaking, the whole thing, he wanted to get out of there, and he couldn't get out of there. He was powerless to actually get himself out of the hospital. And we know he checked himself out of the hospital in a quad shooting. Something else very strange. The coroner's office is waiting for Tupac's autopsy. The vehicle is idling inside a warehouse portion where the shipping and receiving dock is at the hospital. The coroner's vehicle is idling, waiting for Tupac to die. His body is immediately wheeled out and taken to the coroner's, where he's rushed through his autopsy. Doesn't anybody find that strange? That the coroner's vehicle is waiting? Come on, that's very strange. So there's three different stories about when Snoop found out Tupac died. He says he found out with David Aaron in the studio. He says he found out while he was on the road. And he says he had a violent reaction when Tupac died. He was there. Which is it, Snoop? Why is there three different stories? Snoop was leaving Death Row Records. He tried to sign with Russell Simmons. Suge put an end to that. Then he tried to leave and go to Warner's. Suge put an end to that. Now, if there's somebody who's stopping you from doing something that you want to do, he's an obstacle and he's in the way, you got to remove the obstacle. Doesn't it make sense that they wanted to take out Suge Knight? And there was this huge rivalry with Tupac. Now you're going to have Tupac and Suge both in the car at the same time in the crosshairs. It makes sense that you take out Suge and Tupac that night. Trey D says that Snoop and his bodyguard went up to see Tupac. Okay, well, who was his bodyguard? His bodyguard is Kevin Gaines. Who's Kevin Gaines? He's an LAPD officer dating Sharitha Knight, and he's in Las Vegas from 2 days before the Tupac shooting until 2 days after Tupac dies. Doesn't that sound like somebody who's planning things and somebody who's cleaning up the mess afterwards? 2 days before to 2 days after. That brings in LAPD. He was there on special assignment with 2 other LAPD officers. That means Sharitha probably knew something about this, probably was involved. We find out that from the patents. The patents are the ones that tell us Sharitha was involved. From the patents, confession letter, and their statements, we find out that David Kenner went to the meeting that was disguised as a gang summit when they were going to get permission to take out Suge and Tupac. And so David Kenner has this kind of strange relationship with the gangs where he's actually allowed to show up at their meetings. David Kenner's at a gang summit in Cabo where there's people getting jumped into the gang. Isn't that kind of strange that David Kenner would be allowed to be there at that meeting? And doesn't that corroborate the fact that David Kenner is there with Reggie Wright Jr. getting permission to kill Tupac and Suge? I'm told that in the code at 110 in the code video, which is a song on the Little Half Dead Dead Serious album, that Little Half Dead mentions Tupac and then does the whole gun shooting thing right after. Anyway, more later.
Murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse.
All the artists at Death Row was willing to come with me.
David Mack worked for you, right?
No, ma'am.
Never?
Never met him, never heard of him. Didn't know who he was until the accusations that he possibly did work for me. And that's been investigated by LAPD and all of that.
3 different jailhouse informants who offered to wear a wire were all turned down by LAPD. A wire, say informants, that could have caught jailed Officer Perez boasting about his involvement with Death Row Records and the Biggie Smalls murder.
Why would I run a paper trail when I never brought him around nowhere? So if I'm gonna hide him in secret, you think I'm gonna let somebody catch a paper trail? They were paid cash by Snoop.
Perez is a good friend of David Mack's, who both were good friends of Gaines.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sharitha and Reg is great friends, and so all those 3 together was trying to plot.
While we were at the scene, we received a clue that Gaines had a girlfriend that lived in Hollywood Hills. And when we got there, it turned out that his girlfriend was Sharitha Knight, who was the estranged wife of the owner of Death Row Records.
How about Rafael Perez?
Never heard of him until all the incidents happened.
Those guys, if you go back and watch the film, they was already stalking Pac, watching him. So that just tipped the iceberg when something happened. But there was a plan already to do something to it.
So why does everyone keep telling me that David Mack was working for you?
Yeah, I never heard that.
You've never heard that?
That he worked for me.
You've never heard that?
Wait a minute, let me clear that up. I'm saying by anyone that's credible, that will work around there or anything. Like I said, that was all investigated by LAPD. I turned over my payroll, everything.
3 different jailhouse informants who offered to wear a wire were all turned down by LAPD. A wire, say informants, that could have caught jailed Officer Perez boasting about his involvement with Death Row Records and the Biggie Smalls murder.
You always will tell you, those are Reggie people.
Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? He was actually a good kid, too, you know? I'm quite sure if they saw the first one, they saw the second one, because it's the same circle of people.
We had to see this judge today, who I've been in front of before. The atmosphere in this room in this deposition is pretty formal looking.
Right.
We're in a big, nice conference room. This judge is trying to help us.
Right.
Sitting there off the record, like giving me advice.
No, he ain't.
Yeah, he's sitting there saying, before we go on the record, let me give you some clues. And he's sort of telling me what I should say, and then what he's going to say, and this.
Wow.
Yeah.
On the criminal side, he's acknowledged that 57 cases involving 99 suspects are tainted either by perjured testimony, falsification of evidence, or probable cause.
A lying police officer goes to the very heart, to the core of the criminal justice system. 99% of your cases, maybe that's an exaggeration, 90% at least, of your cases rely on the veracity of your police officer. If you cannot trust your police officer, you don't have a case. You don't have a criminal justice system.
You got a lot to cover up, y'all.
Freudian slip.
You got a lot to cover up.